Through the mists comes forth RPGaDay! In the year 2021, RPGaDay comes back for its 8th year. A time in August when every day we tackle another question or topic by answering in a way that uplifts the gaming community and answers questions people might have about this crazy hobby of ours that serves to build the community and bring it up, that many of us make blogs about, video blogs, art, or great works. In celebration of the community of gamers, I welcome you to RPGaDay 2021. Hello, my friends. I am Rob, sometimes known as Omnisci and sometimes as the Dungeon Tutor. You are here with me for another RPGaDay topic. Today being the 4th day of August, it's time for the 4th topic. And the word for today is weapon. Now, weapons, of course, are wondrous things in role-playing games, as so many elements of role-playing games are based around combat. And matter of fact, many games, a full 50 to 80% of the rules can purely be upon resolving a situation through conflict. It certainly is a popular way of dealing with problems in a role-playing game, eh? And as a matter of fact, there are plenty of players out there who feel that if they don't get at least some combat in a role-playing game at some point, it's almost a wasted effort. The characters are very good at the combat, and they want to do the combat. And as goes combat, so goes the weaponry, the tools of combat. So, what I'd like today to bring forth to your thoughts are that a person's weapon and their choice of what they choose to arm themselves with says a tremendous amount about the character and their mindset, if you think about it. Now, this, of course, only applies if your world is a living, breathing place. If weapons are just a list that somebody went and checked through, considered the advantages and disadvantages of each, like perhaps prohibitive cost, perhaps complications in using them that they find incompatible with their character's talents and skills that they're targeting or selecting, then this matters not nearly as much. However, in a more realistic world, if you look at a person and you see how they're armed, it gives you a certain measure of insight into the nature of that person themselves. How so? Well, it's relatively straightforward, honestly. For instance, if you wake up one day and you find yourself surrounded by people who are carrying rapiers, light, thin swords, although, of course, not necessarily truly very light. Rapiers can be fairly substantial, but they don't have thick blades. They're very long and very sharp at the end. Many of them also are fairly sharp along the edges and can make for effective cutting, but primarily are there to thrust. You see many people wearing them. What are you not likely to see? People wearing heavy armor everywhere. Rapiers aren't as effective against somebody who's wearing heavy armor, and if heavy armor is common, you aren't as likely to see rapiers everywhere in a realistic world. You see, people are going to be armed with the weapons appropriate to what the armor of the day is. So, if you are having a game of Dungeons and Dragons, say, and you have plenty of people running around in plate armor, but you have plenty of people running around with rapiers, which historically on Earth came at a different time, well, you're going to have a little bit more difficult time narrating encounters with those rapiers. You're going to have to emphasize the fact that those rapiers are used against gaps, faces, and holes and things. Or basically that any success with such a rapier isn't going to come by plunging it into someone's heart. That's all well protected against rapier thrusts. But they are going to have to strike at corners and nooks and crannies and the like with their rapiers. It's not a weapon that's designed to be used against such armors, and even though there isn't a great deal of mechanical difference in Dungeons & Dragons, armor class is armor class after all, it does have an impact if you think about the world as a realistic place. Now, somebody chooses to use a mace, for instance. Someone might be tempted to say, well, that person is poor, shabby, they're running around with basically a club with a weight on one end. But realistically, it's a direct response, isn't it, to having people around wearing armor, especially mail armor, chain. That way, the chain does an excellent job at stopping somebody from cutting you, so it's good protection against swords. But against a crushing mace, not much protection at all. A little, certainly. It might make some blows glance a little bit more likely. It'll provide a certain amount of cushioning. But bones can get broken and muscle pulverized and tissue split from the force of a solid strike from a mace. Anywhere you rain a blow on a person could cripple. So while you might be tempted to look at somebody with a mace and think, it's a poor warrior, they can't afford anything better, or maybe their convictions are such that they cannot use an edged weapon. That was certainly the case in some worlds and some games. But also, this is a person who is ready to take on a person who is wearing heavier armor. Somebody who is less nimble, somebody who is less likely to try to evade the blow or roll with it. No, you instead have a weapon that is capable of crushing through armor, be it plated armor or leather armor. You are capable of sending ringing blows against shields raised in defense to attack the arm that's holding it, to benumb it with a massive, powerful blow from your mace, and eventually beat down their defense, eh? It's a brutal weapon, but war is brutal. What you wear should speak to what you value and how your character chooses to fight as an expression of how they choose to be. A character with a great axe cares little about their personal defense. They could use a shield. Most societies have some sort of personal protection. A shield is commonly available to many. But if you use a great axe, you are to a certain extent eschewing that protection for yourself in your desire to bring as much damage down upon your enemy as you can. It speaks to a frame of mind. There's a reason why barbarians carry great axes often, or more savage races carry great axes. It's not just the fact that it's a heavy weapon that doesn't necessarily require a great deal of finesse, just strength and endurance to be able to use it again and again. But it also says that I value putting my enemies down over staying clean in combat and not getting injured or nicked up. I value being able to smash down an opponent with a single blow. Even if he cuts me in response, he will go down to the weight of my weapon. So sure am I that I can fell him. As opposed to hedging my bets and carrying around a shield and using a lighter weapon, but one that leaves me better protected. It's all the way that you express yourself through your weapon. And when we get to magical weapons, well, you're just going on and on from there, aren't we? In a certain sense, a magical weapon says that you're fortunate. You found a magical weapon. And if it's obviously magical, it's flaming. It casts long, dark shadows of necrotic energy. It's the signature of the warrior who wields it. And perhaps it has a name. Perhaps the weapon is more famous than the warrior who wields it. Or perhaps the weapon helps the warrior to gain a name that will be memorized by bards for ages and ages and told in stories and legends and lore, eh? Isn't that what we're really hoping for? A spot of immortality, if not true immortality, then in doing deeds that are remembered for generations upon generations, how you touch the world in that way, sometimes through your signature weapon. And let's, of course, not discount the smaller weapons, your daggers, your short swords, the weapons of infamy or of last resort. Just remember this. Almost every warrior on a battlefield has at least some experience with knives, with daggers, with smaller weapons. Why? Because your main weapon can always break, for one. Sometimes can get lost. And having another weapon to draw upon can drastically increase your chances of survival. Sometimes a smaller weapon can be thrown and give you a distance attack, which can weaken a foe before you get to them, or maybe fell a foe who, say, may be wounded. You want to make sure, even though you're not next to them, that they don't get to hurt any of your allies or don't get away. Throw a knife, throw a hatchet, what have you. But a small weapon, like a dagger, says that you're a person who prefers it up close and personal, or for you, fighting face-to-face isn't as much of a priority, if at all. It's just there to say that you can defend yourself, but you're not particularly looking for that kind of a fight or a confrontation. If a person has a reason to be worried about assassins and the like, then maybe that might hold more credence. But a commoner running around with a dagger rarely elicits a great deal of response unless there's a zero-tolerance policy in effect from the powers that be. But almost everybody can carry something like that, and some people get rather obsessed with carrying lots of light weapons, especially for the purposes of throwing volleys of them. That speaks to your own mindset as well, in a way, doesn't it? Either I trust my nimbleness to allow me to be able to finish a fight quickly if I get up close, and sometimes being close up to an enemy within knifing range gives you an advantage over a foe who uses a longer weapon. Imagine trying to use a glaive, a long blade on a pole, and somebody gets right up in your face with a knife. All you can try to do is push them back, really, to try to get out of range so that you can make use of your weapon. But what if they're pernicious? They move up with you, they stick with you, continuing to stab as you try to ward off their blows with the haft of your weapon. You're at their mercy, potentially, if they're really good with that knife. It's a specialty, it's an art, it's a craft, and it speaks to the nature of that character that, even though I don't have a big blade, don't discount me. Don't treat me as if I'm unarmed. I have a knife. It's a way of thinking, and it's a way of expressing your character through your weapon. It's not always just a matter of this does the most damage, or this does the most damage while I can still enjoy the protection of a shield, or this is a weapon that seems to fit my particular skills. Weapons matter, or they could if your world is realistic enough to bear that to fruit. Likewise, for game masters, outfitting your NPCs with weaponry can again be just as good of an expression of your character's personality. Somebody who's a member of a town guard is likely to have decent armor, but not an ostentatious weapon. So somebody who is a champion swordsman, for instance, is going to have a very fine weapon. They would have invested their own resources into that weapon, wouldn't they? And then they basically can hold out their credentials with a flourish of their blade, holding it before them, allowing everyone to see the weapon that they choose to wield, their signature, in front of them at all times, between them and death itself at the hands of their foe. It's a different way of looking at things. It's not just a damage code, or perhaps something that prevents them from using two hands on a particular task. No, weapons can matter because they tell you a great deal about who holds them. So, thank you for joining me. I am Rob, sometimes Omnisci, sometimes the Dungeon Tutor. Thank you for joining me here for this session of RPGaDay. And if you enjoyed this, if you have something to say about the topic at hand, feel free to leave a comment below. Or perhaps join me in my Facebook groups at Omnisci or Dungeon Tutor. And until the next session, I hope that you join me for, because we have many more left to go. Until that next time, my friends, farewell.